from the Mille Band of Ojibwe. Monte is a longtime champion of the animal welfare of both people and animals. Fronk gives annual lectures to the Student Initiative for Reservation Veterinary Services, an official student group of the University of Minnesota College of Veterinary Medicine serving tribal nations throughout Minnesota and neighboring states. Fronk will discuss the importance of cultural humility and communication when working with tribal communities. Please help me welcome Monte.
Well, good afternoon. I know you want to go home and I'm stopping you from it, so I know how that feels when I go to so many fire and EMS conferences like, oh God, don't become that speaker, but I really thank them for doing that because it is our tribal election day, and I've been up since 4:30 this morning, bringing our election box down to the urban office in Minneapolis and going back there and being there till 8 o'clock tonight, so I really do appreciate and working around my busy schedule and all the bragging rights. You could just said I'm Monte and walked up and that's fine. But I will introduce myself in my traditional Ojibwe language. That's what we do when we're in groups and we're meeting people with that one. And we say bozu, which means hello. Awan, Indigas. Awan is my traditional Ojibwe name. It means the fog. Chiminising, it does. I live in the Chiminising district of the Mille Band. Chiminising in our Ojibwe language means people of the island. And I work with the Mille Tribal Police Department for the last 35 years. And now I oversee all the tribal emergency management, fire, EMS, and community risk reduction, which we'll talk about in this story with that one. And I belong to the Mukwa clan, which is the Bear clan. And we are the protectors. We're either medicine people or we're the protectors. So my moccasins kind of follow the correct path of public safety. And it's been an honor. I have served under 3, well, going on 4 absolutely magnificent chief executives. I started under Art Gabo, who passed away in office, and then I had another great, strong Native woman named Marge Anderson, who I served under her, and then Melanie Benjamin is our chief executive, and she chose to step down after over 20 years of service as our chief executive, but to serve under her was amazing. And now I'll be serving under Virgil Wynn, who will be our new chief executive for the Mille Band. So it's been just an amazing journey for where we began, which I'll talk about in my talk today, until where we are now. When I look at this group, I'm asked to talk, I'm a walker, I can't stand, it's my adult ADD going crazy here, is when you look at serving any indigenous native community, and we have to look at what do you need to know? What do you need to understand before you go in to either a sovereign nation or maybe into a large urban native population? And you have to know the history that you're walking into. Because just saying something which you might think sounds appropriate may just set off a whole flurry of negativity toward you and toward your organization, and will totally destroy what you are trying to accomplish or reach out to for that native community. And when you look at the history of Indian country, you will never understand or you will never read in any history book that the US government basically created a 7-point plan to create genocide with all the indigenous native populations. When you hear the word genocide, you think of other countries. You may think of World War II. You may think about maybe in South Africa or other countries. Well, that can't happen within the borders of the United States. But it did. Because when first contact happened 900 years ago, what the Eastern Europeans wanted was the natural resources of the country that we call the United States. But what they didn't realize is that there were millions of indigenous people who called this home, who called our United States home. And the Eastern European belief was, where they're in their way, they are in the way of our progress. And we need to find a way to basically get rid of them or exterminate them. And what they didn't realize is just landing on this shore 900 years ago, that we're talking about diseases today. My God, I never saw so many pet diseases in my life. Listen to it, guys, today. But they didn't realize that they were bringing over common Eastern European diseases that the indigenous population had absolutely zero immunity to. Measles, mumps, tuberculosis, rubella, all of these diseases that were pretty much living through in Eastern European countries was foreign to the entire indigenous population. And just their initial presence spread these diseases all across the East Coast. And hundreds and thousands of indigenous people, men, women, children, babies, died of Eastern European diseases because we had no way genetically to fight them. And to this day, we still don't. You hear the word tuberculosis, every year we are required as tribal employees to still get TB tests. Because to this day, we have absolutely no immunity to it. And if there ever was an outbreak, we would be in the same situation we were 900 years ago. We have no natural immunity because it's an Eastern European disease. Well, once they started coming in to the East Coast and moving westward, they realized that, hey, these indigenous people are still in our way. We have to do something to get them out of the way so we can access the natural resources, the minerals, the trees, okay? Indigenous people, our stories tell us that we were put here by our spirit world. In Ojibwe, we call it our Manitous. We were put here to protect Mother Earth for thousands of generations. We were put here to protect all of the plants, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the winged, the slithering, the minerals, everything that our stories tell us from generations of old ones, tell us that we are connected spiritually to everything around us. Every tree, every rock, all the soil, the air, the sun, all the different temperatures, all of our relatives who are winged and slithering, we're all spiritually connected. Eastern Europeans didn't see that, didn't know that, didn't care. What they just saw was, hey, these people who are here are in our way of progress. So as the U.S. government was formed, they went to the U.S. government and said, we want the resources. So the U.S. government said, well, we will create federal Indian policy to basically create genocide within the United States. So the first way they did this was, well, all these Native people are everywhere. Let's try to find a way that we can confine them into certain land areas and allow access to the natural resources. So the first Indian policy was first contact. The second one, what is known as the treaty periods. This is all through the 1800s. And for the Mille Band, we were formed by two treaties, the Treaty of 1837 and the Treaty of 1855. Now, for all the remaining indigenous people who did not die of Eastern European diseases, when we signed these treaties, we gave up millions of acres of natural resources. And typically the federal government put us in the most useless land to live on, because that gave them access to the natural resources. So from millions of indigenous people, because of these treaties, we are now down to 580 federally recognized tribes within the borders of the United States. For every treaty that every tribal nation signed, it was supposed to guarantee and promise all Native people 3 things. It promised to provide basic housing, basic health care, and basic education. And from 1837 and 1855 for the Mille Lacs Band, these 3 things to this day have not been met. And if you work with any, or are going to work with any indigenous community or tribal nation, you have to understand that those 3 things guaranteed by treaty have not been met. And you will see that, you will hear the stories of that, and you have to realize that that was the second federal Indian policy. When you realize, okay, we corralled them on these reservations, and now for millions there's 580 federally recognized tribes. But the federal government said, you know what? They're still practicing their culture. They're still doing their language. They're practicing their religious ceremonies. They're raising their kids traditionally. Well, we can't have that. We want these Native people to be assimilated and act like Eastern Europeans. So the federal government said, for the third federal Indian policy, well, who has the best record of assimilating populations to be like Eastern Europeans? Well, by God, it was the churches, and especially the Catholic churches. So the third federal Indian policy, what was called the assimilation times. For us who are Native, we call these the boarding school era, or industrial schools. This is where our kids, our grandparents, were basically stolen off the reservation and forced into these Native boarding schools, typically run by religious institutions. And basically their goal and their directive by the federal government was to kill the Indian and to save the man. And if any of you watched the 1823 series with Harrison Ford in the very beginning, and you saw that boarding school, that is exactly what my relatives survived. I'm second generation on my mom's side, and first generation away from boarding schools on my dad's side. Okay? My grandmother, because they always tell the stories, when the black car would come up on the reservation with the social worker and the Catholic nuns, every Indian child was told to go run in the woods and hide, because they were the one that's going to take them and put them in boarding schools. Well, my grandmother couldn't run fast enough at age 5, and they grabbed her. And they put her on a train from Cloquet and shipped her down to Pipestone, Minnesota for the first part of her young life, and then shipped her down to Lawrence, Kansas. Okay? Now, she graduated in 1942. From age 5 to age 18, she was only allowed to come home 3 times. Kill the Indian, save the man, or save the woman. Okay? When she came back, she was a good little Catholic and basically a good maid. They had beaten out of her language. They had sexually molested her out of her customs by the Catholic nuns. And that's what they did. And that's what these boarding schools did till almost the late 60s, was assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. When the government said, well, you know what, we have tried to assimilate these Native people, okay? We killed millions off by disease. We forced them on reservations, but treaties that we're not living up to. Now we sent them off to boarding schools, and we assimilated many of them, not all of them, and many of our grandparents escaped this brutal reality. And then the federal government said, but you know what? Now, that we couldn't basically kill them off with genocide. All the tribal lands are on reservations. We sent them off to be assimilated. And now they're doing a little, we think they're better in society. But we still have a financial obligation to them. So the federal government said, well, we have to figure a way to basically wash our hands of all these Native families that we have a trust and treaty responsibility to. So the next federal Indian policy came in the 50s, and this was called relocation. And the federal government made these grandiose promises to the 580 federally recognized tribes to say, hey, if you agree to be relocated to a major city, we will give you a better life. We will provide you housing. We will provide you a job. We will provide you a way of life. What they didn't say was, we are trying to wash our hands of you so we don't have to keep paying for services. And at that time, many of the 580 tribes, we were living in poverty. And this program seemed like something that could help many Native families. So many families, including my relatives, voluntarily signed up for relocation.